Very good. It is kind of interesting. We got into Portland, Oregon, went to Vancouver, Washington last Wednesday. Mike Kennedy had a class and we enjoyed a little bit of fellowship. Charles Daly had us out for breakfast the next day, and later on we stayed with his son-in-law, camped out. And I like these folk up there in Northwest. It's 47 degrees. They sleep with the windows open, the heater off. And we're from Florida, just shivering under about 4 quilts and all the other trying to keep warm. Good snuggle weather, Rick. Good snuggle weather. But it was neat. We drove 1,000 miles to get to a First Church in Montana, and the preacher never went to Bible college. He went to teacher school. He was a school teacher, and the local preacher trained him to preach. And this guy was like James Arness. He's like 6 foot 4 inches tall, 45 years young. And you looked up at him. And then his elder was 6 foot 6, and he was a guy that looked like John Wayne, just big burly guy. Both these guys were, and he had read the book. How many have you folks ever read Christians Only by James DeForest Merck on the church? Some of us have. When I was 17 years old, I read that in Bible college, and the elder read that book, and they pulled their congregation out of a liberal church, and they became an independent Christian church 3 or 4 years ago. The town's 1,100 people. The church runs about 50. We had 25. He said, if we ever get them all out at one time, we'd have a room full. But here we had 25 people we spoke to that morning. But here's a little little Montana church, 1,000 miles from nowhere, about 40 miles south of Butte, that are preaching the gospel. They're a small congregation just as we are, but still making a difference in their community. And we ran into some congregations at one time where 125 and 150 and some are 80, and they're all running, some of those congregations are running 15 or 20 people. Some of the congregation says for Sunday night, you're going to be good if you have 3 people show up. And we went out there, we ended up with 15 and 20 and 25 people show up. And they warned us ahead, plan on 3, 4, 5 people to show up. But to look at the churches in that particular area in the Northwest, you think of the Northwest being Oregon and California liberal. These churches are just good old conservative, Bible-believing congregations of just good people. And we had a chance to encourage those congregations, and they at the same time encouraged us. We're going to be reading in Ecclesiastes chapter 8. After speaking at 2 congregations that Sunday, we had Monday, Tuesday off, and so Sandy did a wash and I worked on a sermon. So I was prepared for this morning. And it's in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 8, where it deals with submission and it deals with joy. Who is like the wise men? Who knows the explanation of things? Wisdom brightens a man's face and changes its hard appearance. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases, since the king's word is supreme. Who can say to him, what are you doing? Whoever obeys his commands will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and proceed. For there is a proper time procedure for every matter, though a man's misery weighs heavily upon him, since no man knows the future. Who can tell him what is to come? No man has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the day of his death. As no one is discharged in the time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Then too I saw the wicked buried. Those who used to come and go from the holy place received praise. In this city where they did this, this too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, the hearts of the people are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked man commits 100 crimes and still lives a long time, I know that it will go better with God-fearing men who are reverent before God. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. Righteous men who get what the wicked deserve, and wicked men who get what the righteous deserve. This to us is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because nothing is better for man under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of his life, and God has given him under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom, and to observe man's labor on earth, his eyes not seeing sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all his efforts to search it out, man cannot discover its meaning. Even if a wise man claims he knows, he cannot really comprehend it. Submission and joy. No man has power over the wind to contain it. And nobody has power over when they're going to live or when they're going to die. We saw some brutal episodes here during the storm. And I know a lot of folk were asking about how things went in Florida. And I says we leave the hurricanes of Florida and get to enjoy the firestorms of Washington, Oregon, California. One lady gave a testimony one Sunday morning before we spoke and said every house in her neighborhood burned but hers. Her yard got scorched, but her house survived. She was a lady cop. She tossed her 2 dogs in the car, jumped in and escaped, and as soon as she came, the thing went poof. Everything just went. Others say there's a warning of a tidal wave, and when we got down to Crescent City, California, we saw tidal waves, tsunami warnings. I've never been a place where I've seen panther crossings and deer crossings, but never tsunami warnings. And they tell us if you can see the tsunami coming, it's too late.
Wow.
You'll never escape it. You can run to high ground if you want. No man has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the days of his death. It's kind of interesting. You know, we took us 3 days to clean up our fences and our neighbor, and take the chainsaw and cut everything up to the 4-foot sections you got to do. And finally, our trash pile's gone over at our house in our neighborhood. The trash piles are still up here by the church. But we had about $80 worth of roof damage here. We had $5,000 worth of tree damage over next door. And we look at CJ. She had a $2 screen door latch got blown off. Took 20 minutes to fix. It took us 2 hours to rake up Sharon's backyard with her daughter. And it took us 4 hours to clean up the churchyard. And yet Ricky ends up with $18,000 worth of damage on his roof. You know, bam. I talked to another lady. She says we had a tree come down on my car, had a tree come down on my husband's truck, and we had a tree come down on the roof of the rental house. So some people came out and they said we didn't even see a shingle blown. Other people lost lots. You know, it just be what it be. But no man has power over the wind to contain it. You go out west, and when we landed in Portland, Oregon, we could not go east on the Oregon Road. They had it open west, but on the east there's about 6,000 trees down. And once the fires are contained, they got to remove all these trees. And then after that, when the rain comes, you have mudslides coming on over. So you get rid of one thing, come up with the next thing. And we had to run about 125 miles along the Columbia River in North Washington, and stopping at every little podunk holler. You drive and you slow down, you stop, and you drive and you slow down, you stop. Along that, then we crossed the bridge back around. We got onto the Oregon Columbia side, and we were able to get up to 65, 70 mile an hour. And then when we got up into Montana and Idaho, oh, wouldn't Glenn been glad. Posted sign, 80 miles an hour. You set your cruise at 84 and just drive. Glenn would have loved it. Yeah, and that was all the interstate all over. They used to not even post. This is drive a safe. They used to say drive safe is all they used to say. Now they got to post 80 mile an hour. In Idaho, when we got on the interstate close to Boise, we ended up seeing part of that. But you know, if I had a choice of being caught in a wind of a hurricane or in the middle of a forest fire, I'll take the hurricane anytime.
I agree.
Because in the fire, there's no place to go. At least in a hurricane, you can hunker down. But in a fire, there's no place to go. It's kind of interesting, though, in chapter 8, 1 through 9, he talks about a relationship with a king, but we do not have kings in America. We have congressmen. But we don't really have the honor of the king. We don't have that particular system of government. We don't even have a parliamentary system. And apparently when they want to make George Washington king, he refused to take that particular position. And he'd rather not. So he became first president a few times. But it's kind of interesting about obeying authority. It is due to many, and he says over here, is that right?
You went too far forward.
No, I just hit the button and it ran through.
Hitting it down.
Yeah, I hit the thing down and Jen ran through 10 slides. This thing's touchy.
Yeah.
See, who is as the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of things? A man's wisdom makes his face to shine. And it's kind of interesting when he talks about when a person's wise, according to the scriptures, his face shines. And the one we know whose face shined was one who's in the very presence of God, Moses himself. When he went up to receive the 10 Commandments and trashed the 10 Commandments, when he saw the people worshiping the golden calf, he went up and got the 10 Commandments all over again. And when he came down, he shone like a flashbulb. He shone with such radiance that he had to wear a veil until that aura finally dimmed down. And when one is in the presence of God, he will shine with a radiance that even human eyes cannot behold. But this is kind of an interesting thing when we talk about brightening the face. Brightening the face actually is an industry in itself. Those who offer such services use cosmetics, facials, and even plastic surgery. These are all in great demand, and we wonder how many are interested in reading Ecclesiastes 8:1 that says, how to brighten your face, get the wisdom of God. Many mothers may easily recommend it to their children, but when it comes to brightening their own faces, they'll flip through those yellow pages looking for the closest beauty parlor. But we talk about wisdom in brightening the face, and that's what the Bible talks about when we talk about brightening the face. No man has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the day of her death. It's kind of interesting when people look at the brevity of life, and my son, of course, gave me all this wise idea, or wise wisdom. He says, Dad, you know how to avoid the infirmities of old age? I says, no, son, how do we avoid the infirmities of old age? He says,
young.
Dad, die young.
That's right.
I said, get out of here.
That's what I tell my mother all the time.
Get out of here. But he says, no one has power over the day of his death. You're going to die when your time comes. And some of you know that already. You've kissed the face of death more times than one, and God says, it's not your time yet. And others, and I'm looking at some of my very close friends, Billy Love. Somebody was plowing with his heifer. He was driving over to kill the man. And on his way over to kill the man, he got in a traffic accident and killed himself. Billy was part Indian. If he went to jail for the rest of his life for manslaughter, he would have died in jail. He just could not have been camped up. Indians, you just don't put them in a jailhouse. They just they got to have the wide open ranges. That would kill a person locking him up. And here Billy was in his 30s, and he was my best friend. We used to go hunting together, we went fishing together, went swimming together. And then we had guys like Roger Dice, my other best friend, who was my best friend at my wedding, and took him to Jamaica to teach, and he took one of our students and interned him there in California, ordained him, and the elders said we'll support him the next 2 years to finish his Bible education, to finish his preacher training in Jamaica. And 6 months later, Roger and his family were flying to Hawaii. He died from a heart attack. 52 years old, 53 years old. I think he was 1 year older than me. Now I'm 70, so I'm 17 years older than he is. But at the time, he was 1 year older than me. My best friend. And his wife sang at our wedding. Lois sang at our wedding. And he's the one who introduced me to the Lord, taught me how to pray. And we ran on his 1956 Mercury and went over to Bible college in Iowa together. No one has power over the day of his death. And you look at all your friends, 35, 53. I look at guys like Charlie Ford and Keith Boyd, guys that were 65, 63, 64. 1 year at Grove Park Congregation, we had 7 men die in that 1 year. And they're all in their 60s, early 60s. Bam, 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 bam. And, I talked to some of those guys up there on our trip, and I said, we as the Northside Church, we lost 14 people. 7 people moved away, and 7 people died in the last 2 years. And we've gained 6 people since then. You lose 14, you gain 6. I mean, that's not good, but it's good. Thank you, God, for the 6 people God's brought us. But reality is reality. Yet I talked to another guy. He says we've lost 18 people in our congregation. And their congregation went from 40 down to about 22. And so they've got to rebuild and start all over again whenever those things happen. But nobody has power over the day of his death. Why? Because the wise man Solomon says we don't. Joy Johnson, 86. She wanted to die running. You know how people have this bucket list? We got to go and go up in a hot air balloon. Got to go to see the pyramids of Egypt. All these bucket lists. She wanted to die running, so she went to the New York Marathon. She crossed the finish line. The next day, she died.
Wow.
But then, that was her deal. She kind of had that, I want to do one thing and I want to die with a smile on my face. And I remember Chester Hott, one of my elders in Pennsylvania. We'd go around calling, and every time what Chester knew the widows' houses to go calling to, because he'd always get a cherry pie and he'd always get his cup of coffee. And he had a big gut on him, a little guy like Morgan. He said, "Preacher, when I die, I'm going to die with a full belly." And he did. He went through 10 strokes, and we figured 10 strokes, the first one should have taken him. He went through 10 strokes over the next 10 years. But God wasn't done with him yet. We started a Christian day school and started the Bible Institute and all that other. Chester was in the middle of everything. God was not done with him yet. God gave him 10 more years. We had an elder come down from Point Marion, Pennsylvania, Herb Higginbotham. He says, "We got such a liberal, stinking preacher. I want to fire him, but we don't know who's going to replace him. So I want you to teach me how to preach so we can fire our preacher." I'm serious, Rick. It was that bad. So he came and we trained that elder to be a preacher. And Herb Higginbotham had to take early retirement for the mines because the doctor says, "You're going to die within the year." God gave him 10 more years. As he committed his life to ministry and serving as an elder and as a preaching elder, Herb Higginbotham, I pulled him down. He preached at our chapel there with the kids on a regular basis. We pulled old Herb down. And he had the joy of life, and he did not have the power over the day of his death. He just served God. And they that decide to serve God, God will sometimes smile on you and give you extended life because you've got a spiritual purpose. That's been true in our acquaintances and with people that we've had the privilege of training into leadership and ministry. Number 2, chapter 10 through 14, he talks about we punish the wrong people. And so that puzzles us. And that's what he says, "Though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him." And you wonder, how come these people keep sinning and sinning and sinning, and all they do is get richer and richer and richer? They got a new TV series on the History Channel. That one drug lord, you know, the big drug dealer, that they want to know what happened to his millions. I mean, they talked about his whole house was stuffed with $100 bills. He just had shelf after shelf after shelf, and a whole garage full of $100 bills. And every pantry where you have books, he had $100 bills stacked up. That guy had money all over the place. And you look at these guys who are drug lords, and they do evil 100 times, and they say, well, he's going to live forever. Not always so. I was talking to Roger, who was the drug kingpin. He handled millions of dollars in drug deals. Every time somebody made a run, if you run his drugs for him, you made about $20,000 a run. Not bad for 2 days worth of work. To drive in your SUV from Los Angeles, California to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Not bad at all. And life seemed to be good. Life seemed to be glorious. And now you don't leave the mafia and live to tell about it. And I know one man was converted in a Billy Graham revival, and he was a mafia hitman. And the guys came to take him out, and he told them, "You cannot threaten me with heaven." So they figured as long as he didn't rat on them, they'd let him live, and he lived. Same thing with Roger. They knew him as an honest crook. He never did he was always honest with his drug transactions. He always paid for the dope he had. He always delivered the goods he promised. And because of his integrity as a crook, they knew he'd never rat on them because of his integrity as a crook. And so even though even today he's still got a target on his back, but he's an Armenian who grew up. His Christianity was he was grown an Armenian. Armenia became a Christian nation before Constantine made the rest of the empire Christian. And that was from whence he was. But a sinner, how come they're so blessed? I saw the wicked buried. Those who used to come and go from the holy place receive praise. And in the city where they did this too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, the hearts of the people are filled with schemes to do wrong. That's what we find today as far as whenever criminals get by and they sit on death row for 10 years and 20 years, people wonder, is capital punishment effective? Well, at least it takes the person out of commission. It also has them stew in their juices for decades, knowing that one of these days they're going to walk that green mile. But whenever a sentence for crime is not quickly carried out, people said, hey, they can do wrong and get by with it, we can do wrong and get by with it. And from this lesson in Scripture, hopefully our courts could learn something from the wisdom of Solomon. He also says we punish the wrong people, so it puzzles us. And why do good people get punished and bad people get by with it? Solomon does not answer that question. He just leaves us hanging. He just says, it's meaningless. Even in the New Testament, they came up to Jesus and said this, or Jesus was saying, this man, is it because of his sin that he was crippled, or is it because of the sins of his parents? And Jesus says, this tower of Siloam fell upon some people, and so many people died. But he said, except you repent, you shall all likewise perish. And he talked about all those people that were widows that died of famine, and then this one woman that got the smile of the prophet, and whenever she poured her cruse of oil, it would go as long as the famine, and it provided for her family. But he says, regardless, God took care of this widow, but except you repent, you shall all likewise perish. And Jesus said, don't go looking over your shoulder and wonder why bad things happened to this person, why these people died and this person lived. And Jesus dealt with tragedies of fallen towers and widows starving. And we look at tragedy, we didn't pick up a newspaper, hear the news. We couldn't, for 2 and 3 days at a time, we couldn't even get a bar on our telephone, let alone emails. We had to get at a motel or at somebody's house that had email. We were totally incognito for 2 and 3 and 4 days at a time. And everybody says, you and Cassandra dropped off the face of the earth. Well, we didn't, but we finally heard about tragedy there in Nevada. We stayed at that Pyramid Hotel, and that Pyramid Hotel is right next to the Mandarin. They got kind of a shopping concourse between the Pyramid. What was that Pyramid Hotel called?
Luxor.
Yeah, the Luxor. We stayed at the Luxor. And then we'd go to the shopping mall and wander around the lobby there at the Mandalay. And we were back and forth there, and Mandalay is where all that stuff happened.
Yep.
And you just kind of wonder, we were at the right time, right place, and other people at the wrong time, the wrong place.
That's right.
And you say, well, why do bad things happen to good people, and why do good things happen to bad people? The Bible doesn't answer that except the book of Job. And you look at Job, and you figured that man was a mess. And yet at the end of the story, he ended up with twice as much as he started with. And even though he lost all his 10 children, his daughters, remember the wife says, curse God, die, and God says, little lady, you're going to have 10 more babies. And having a baby's not fun. And yet his daughters were the most beautiful, they're beauty queens. And he had 7 sons too on top of that. I think he had 3 daughters, 7 sons after that. So God got back to Mrs. Job and says, you're going to have 10 more babies. And Job, your daughters are going to be knockouts. And your sons are going to be whatever. And he ended up with twice as much as he had. And yet the whole book of Job ends answerless. Why do bad things happen to good people? All we know is he ended up twice as better off than he started with. And that's how the book ends. So God leaves us hanging on there. All we know is it's going to work out. Faith. Then finally we run into this enjoying life and submitting to God even though He won't tell us His reasons. And I like this kind of when He talks about commending the enjoyment of life. Nothing's better for a man under the sun to eat and drink and be glad. Communism. They said it's meant for man to be born. It's meant for man to be miserable. It's meant for man to die. That's why it takes till noon for the foremen to get their people sobered up long enough to go to work in Russia. I mean, they have a horrible vodka drinking problem. Ever since the Tsar says we're going to become Orthodox, they didn't want to become Muslims because Muslims frowned on vodka. And they didn't want to become Jews because God was punishing the Jewish nation. But that's, they said, well, this Greek Orthodox thing, that kind of with the gold domes and the pomp and ceremony, that appealed to the Russian people. But at the same time, the Russian attitude was this: to be born, to suffer, and to die. But here, Solomon gives the impression for those that worship God, he says, I commend enjoying life. Sit down and enjoy a Super Bowl football. Go down to the beach and catch some rays. Go take your family out and enjoy a dinner, a steak dinner. Or go down to your favorite shrimp place and fish place and eat your baked flounder. It's better for a man under the sun to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of his life that God's given him under the sun. I know in Pennsylvania, some of our guys, they live to go hunting. The whole world revolved around hunting. They rolled up the streets of Point Marion, Pennsylvania when it was hunting day. And we had an open door policy with the school. We had the private school, and it said, you young people are going to go hunting with your uncles and going hunting with your granddads. You got the day off. You can't fight it in Pennsylvania. When it's hunting day, you can't fight it. I remember one of my elders says, well, preacher, I want, after Sunday school, I'm taking communion, why don't you give me cutting because I'm going hunting. I found out later hunting day didn't start till Monday. He's trying to tell me it started right after Sunday school, Sunday morning. So Chester came up to me, and I was a young guy. I mean, Ray, I didn't know any better as a preacher. I was only, 30 years old at the time. And this elder who's going hunting asked me to give communion in the kitchen, right, so he could skip church and skip my sermon. So I opened the Bible to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, that says, not forsaking the assembly as the matter of some is, but exhorting one another, so much the more as you see the day approaching. Yeah. And so that's what I use for a communion devotion, getting on to my elder for skipping church, And I prayed and I gave him the communion. Thank you, preacher. He's like a bulldog. Thank you, preacher. He went off. He went hunting anyway. And then I discovered that you pick your battles. You got to pick your battles. I remember it was Super Bowl Sunday, and I get up and preach. We had Sunday night service then. Now we got the 2:30 services and communion route. We don't get home to 7 o'clock. We don't have Sunday night service, but we have 3 services every Sunday, 2 on Monday anyway. But I remember preaching on Super Bowl Sunday, and this is when Pittsburgh Steelers, we took 3 Super Bowls. And when we live in Colorado, we took Super Bowl there. And we moved to Florida, we take Super Bowl. Everywhere me and Cassandra go, we win the Super Bowl. It just happens to go with us wherever we go. We're Super Bowl people. It's just kind of that aura that surrounds us. But I remember Sunday that I got up in the pulpit Sunday morning. I preached, today is Super Bowl Sunday. Where will God find you? In God's house worshiping Him tonight, or home watching the Super Bowl? That was my sermon. A few years later, I became an elder at the Combi Church here, and one of the elder's sons, Tim Paul's boy, Kenny, come up. Brother Richard, we're going to have church tonight. We're going to cancel church tonight because tonight's Super Bowl Sunday. And I knew Dale Williamson, who was the other elder and the senior pastor of the church, was already wanting to dismiss service because of Super Bowl Sunday. And I knew Tim Paul, he's like Dan Parker. He's sports all the way. I mean, he's sports. You just don't get between him and sports. He's like a bulldozer. And I knew I was the third elder. Now, I can do one of 3 things. Either go along to get along, or be a hard-nosed son of a gun and stick my guns like I did in Pennsylvania. But as you get a little older, you pick your battles. And you knew already, there's the other two elders were saying, we're dismissing service because of Super Bowl Sunday. So, I mean, who am I? And I told him, I says, well, Kenny, who am I to stand between you and who's going to win this ball game? You enjoy the game. We're dismissing church tonight. And I said that with my fingers crossed behind my back, cross my heart, hope to die and stick a needle in my eye. I didn't say it with a whole lot of conviction, but I knew I wasn't going to win that battle. I already lost it with my other two elders.
Yeah.
So in that situation, then I find out as time goes by, people have taken Super Bowl Sunday and made it a great time of relationships and Christian fellowship, and they turned the whole thing into a great spiritual time with the church family. And then after 7 years of life, I read this scripture in Ecclesiastes, and it says, so, Richard Geringswald, I commend, Solomon speaking to me, the enjoyment of life, because nothing's better under the sun than to eat and drink and watch Super Bowl on Sunday nights.
Right.
Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of life God's given him under the sun. So maybe as time has gone by, this old preacher's become a little older and a little wiser, and you learn to pick your battles. Then I saw all the work of God that man cannot find out, the work that is done under the sun, however much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. Eat, drink, and enjoy life.